Other type of programs that the government has implemented, a war on poverty. Poverty hasn't eliminated poverty any more than the war on drugs has eliminated illicit drug traffic. Yet costs for these programs and more continue to rise, draining the pocketbooks of Americans, taxpayers, dry to the point of where the frustration levels have come about, and as you've seen this summer with the Tea Parties and many other organizations that are getting involved. These programs never work. They fail to live up to their promises. And you know, it's almost ludicrous when you do something over and over and over again with not any results. The results are, as my father always said, a giant insane asylum and the worst patients are running it. And he was a surgeon. I had 6 other family members. I was the 7th physician and health professional and one dentist in the family. And they all told me from very early on to get involved in politics because they didn't want the lawyers to take over. No offense made. But what happened is that my dad told me early on, he said, son, he was a state senator, and we have cousins that were physicians that were state representatives and also congressmen. And basically what they told me says, you're going to have a drug problem because we're going to drag you to every political and church meeting in the county. And they did. Well, we see the government continuing to do this over and over again. Now we have a whole new problem that we have to solve. We're now 35 to 50 million people will be uninsured, need more insurance, Medicaid rolls, and guess what? Obamacare, we're still going to have 35 to 50 million uninsured under Obamacare. But your taxes will go up, more regulations, more loss of freedom, and as we'll talk in a minute, Obamacare is not just about health care, it's about losing freedoms. The precious thing that we all, as our independence, will be slowly taken away with lots of more of taxes, increasing regulations, and sometimes, you know, many people say that, well, it's not really that bad, but it's very difficult to convince the masses until it's too late. And then sometimes they won't admit it. The arguments about Obamacare are sound. There's other aspects of this legislation that's very onerous. We first have to realize that it does not matter what you believe the law says, even if you have read it. What matters is how the law is interpreted by these agencies and these 159 new agencies that are sprouting up. Let me tell you about an individual by the name of Cass Sunstein. Cass Sunstein, in regard to regulations and their implementation, he is the best friend of Obama and got appointed as a Director of Office Information and Regulatory Affairs. Now, through his office, he will filter everything that goes through Obamacare through him and his underlings. Cass Sunstein has received notoriety due to a paper he wrote advocating that government infiltrate the so-called anti-government organizations like the Tea Party, like the Birch Society, like Eagle Forum, like veterans, which I am one, that are coming back from harm's way, and they're dangerous to society because they're killers, you know. That's what he says. He said there's a conspiracy now existing out there, Cass Sunstein said, and he says we're going to take that away and we're going to rule these people that want to show us the wrong direction. His job is to neutralize us as patriots and to marginalize these organizations. And thank heavens he hasn't been to Oklahoma because, you know, we were 77 counties red against Obama, not just necessarily for the other candidates. Whether you agree with these organizations or not, to do what Sunstein advocates would be a direct attack on this precious document that I carry around inside of my suit pocket called the U.S. Constitution. You know, outside the Holy Scriptures, which was, I believe, ordained by God and written by man, this document, the Constitution, was written by man and ordained by God. He's wanting to attack the First Amendment, the freedom of speech and assembly. Cass Sunstein is the man who will be very active in the regulatory process of this whole new health care bill. Secondly, Obamacare is not a smoking gun. It's a loaded gun. And what you'll see is the empowering of an act similar to what we saw with OSHA. You know, that stands for the Occupational Surveillance and Harassment Administration. Obamacare, just as was done with OSHA, gives power to an agency which, after the law is passed, creates its own regulations. Didn't have them up front. It was an executive order under Bush 41, and it was snuck in 68 pages. Without exception, regulations imposed by new laws always exceed what was promised to get the law passed in the first place. Our U.S. congressman, now our U.S. senator, when OSHA put in these 68 pages for regulations in doctors' offices and hospitals nationally in Oklahoma, I contacted our congressman, now our U.S. senator, Senator Inhofe. Without exception, regulations imposed by new laws always exceed what was promised to get the law passed in the first place. Our U.S. congressman, now our U.S. senator, when OSHA put in these 68 pages for regulations in doctors' offices and hospitals nationally in Oklahoma, I contacted our congressman, now our U.S. senator, Senator Inhofe, and he said I was the only physician in the whole state that out of 9,000 physicians that bothered to call him or write him or ask him about it. And I said, have you looked at this? No, he hadn't. And he said, well, would you write me a critique? So I wrote a 13-page critique, and he used a lot of it, not enough of it, to knock out some of the ridiculous things. It cost our practice. I was in a 10-man, woman group practice, family practice in internal medicine. It cost us an additional $5,000 a year of things that we were doing anyway. It cost our community hospital next door to us, and they stopped counting at about $75,000 a year. So guess who pays the costs? We do, as consumers, we as patients. Now, the really scary problem is this new agency, accumulation like OSHA of 150, actually 159 agencies. As you look through some of these, they're not even health related, and that's why I started off to tell you this is not about a health care bill, even though they want socialized medicine so badly. It's about taking away your freedoms with more agencies that will have a list that go on and on and on, like OSHA created and empowered one agency. In 14 years of FDR's presidency, he only had 40 agencies. We have now overnight 159 new agencies. The difference with Obamacare that they created these, each mandated to regulate and certain aspects of the medical world and even your family life. And we'll get into that in just a moment. All of this is all packed into one little law. The true reasons that opposition to the law has not been as successful as it could be are that most people, even the so-called experts, as I said earlier, haven't even read it. And most people cannot read a law through the eyes of those who mean to enforce it. You know, they didn't even read the 8-page immigration law in Arizona before the federal government came down with all types of lawsuits, and president didn't read it, attorney general didn't read it, but 8 pages, they weren't even wanting to look at that Arizona bill, and claimed all sorts of things. And by the way, we'll have the same bill in Oklahoma starting in February. I'm going to file it. In the end, no matter what the law is, again, I repeat that it's how it's implemented that how it's make it count. Now let's make an important point here, very important, and listen to this very carefully. This law, just as OSHA, creates a department of government that throws the primary idea of separation powers out the window. We have 3 branches of government, and they are to check and balance one another. And here we see the growing number of agencies that are the legislative, executive, and judicial all in one law. So that means it sets the law through regulation, it enforces the law through heinous fines and other means as an executive, and it judges the law as a judiciary through a variety of boards and commissions. So we see here now not just ignoring the Constitution, but trampling on it. That's why we feel very confident. 42 states, including Texas, soon to be Oklahoma, because we had to wait till the next session and got a new governor, will file a lawsuit. And it's moving on. Virginia's already got the okay in Florida to move on the unconstitutional lawsuit. Now, there's an individual that you all are probably familiar with by the name of James Madison, the father of the Constitution. And James Madison made a quote. He said, "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." Federalist Paper number 47. This is the problem we see in Obamacare. Now, you can see by this chart, when I was in the Army, we'd call it something differently, but as a Baptist deacon, I won't repeat that. But you can see by this chart of the new agencies and how they work in the federal government, it represents a huge growth in the power of the federal government. As bad as it looks, this page only represents 1/3 of the agencies in the system, since it's all that fits on the one paper I could put on your PowerPoint. Now look at the new law, 2,500 pages. It's rather obvious that when a law takes 2,500 pages to print, that it has a great accumulation of powers. In comparison and contrast to the U.S. Constitution, designed to run the government, entire government, for all of these years, was originally written on a single sheet of paper. Yet this legislation took 2,500 pages in order to control the medical and insurance professions, and along with it, you, the patients, us, the patients. This legislation was difficult to read in addition to its length. Much of the language is so convoluted in lawyer language, and I call them weasel words, that took reading it several times to get the real meaning, and we will give you a graphic example of that in just a moment. Once the 2,500-page bill was passed into law, it was printed using fine print, condensing down, as I said earlier, condensing down to 905-page document. Still too long for anyone desiring to curl up with a warm glass of milk and a warm blanket to read it. True, it would put you to sleep, but when you woke up, you would not remember what you'd read. We believe it was written purposely and deliberately so people would discourage people from reading it, and it has. I mean, when you can't get Congress to read it or the president to read it, and probably 99% of the populace, we want to remind you again, once again, you have read it with the mindset of those who must implement it. So if you do read it, think of the bureaucracy that will be implementing. And as we, in that regard, can anyone debate it in Washington that they have socialism in mind? It doesn't matter what their motive is, either good or ill. The fact is that we have too many people who are obviously setting this nation on the path to socialism. Government involvement in every aspect of our lives. The nanny state is here. Now we, for many years as physicians, understand that we have privacy laws. Then HIPAA came along, and for those of you in health professions, by the way, there is a clause in HIPAA that says if you have fewer than 10 full-time employees, you do not do electronic billing, you have the country doctor clause, and you can go by the laws of privacy that have been in existence ever since we can remember. But what under Obamacare, any time a law enforcement agency or a government agency wants to come in to the doctor's office or clinic or hospital, they can just come in and take your records. So it's public forum 101. What has hindered the police and other investigative agencies and the IRS from getting into your health records now is Katie bar the door. They now have access under Obamacare to everything, your complete medical records, and your doctor and your lawyer can't stop them. Obamacare begins the process of eroding the doctor-patient relationship. Ultimately, the government will come between you